Welcome to Jaji Technologies. In this tutorial, I will guide you through the process of setting up a web interface and publishing data using the inSis suite. By following these steps, you will be able to create a platform where others can easily read the data. I hope you had the opportunity to watch the video tutorial demonstrating the process of reading data from third-party applications using Web APIs. Now, inSys introduced Web APIs specifically designed for third-party applications to access and retrieve data from inSys systems. This functionality proves to be valuable when there is a need to extract specific data from inSys systems placed at different geographical locations. So, in such cases, utilizing the Web API becomes practical solution. To read data using a Web API from inSys suite, follow these steps. Obtain an API key. The API key is a unique identifier that authenticates your request and allows access to the Web API's data. Configure API key authentication. In the inSys administrator, it is necessary to generate a device within the System Explorer. The device type should be set as custom. Every device will be assigned a unique device identifier and API key. Here's why they are necessary. The device identifier and API key are crucial for secure and authenticated data access via a web API. The device identifier uniquely identifies each device or application accessing the data, while the API key provides authentication and authorization. Together, they establish a controlled access system, preventing unauthorized entry and allowing only authorized device or applications. Setup authorization. Include the API key in your API request headers or as parameter, depending on the API authentication mechanism. This step is essential to authenticate and authorize your request to access the data. Craft the API request. Compose an HTTP request, usually using GET method, to retrieve the desired data. Include any necessary query parameters to specify the data you want to retrieve, such as filters. Send the API request. Send the API request to the specified API endpoint using your preferred programming language or API testing tool. Ensure that the API key is included in the request headers or parameters. Handle the API response. Receive the API response, which typically contains the requested data in a structured format, such as JSON or XML. It is also important to examine the HTTP status code written in the API response. A status code in the 2xx range, example 200 for OK, generally indicates a successful request and retrieval of data. Codes outside this range typically indicate an error or failure. Let me guide you on creating and designing a web API on the inSys system to expose the desired data for third-party applications. Upon logging in with the appropriate credentials, they gain access to the inSys administrator portal. Upon entry, they will be presented with an admin dashboard. To proceed, locate the devices section within the portal and select the test device option. So for the tutorial, I have provided name and given description of this device. In the previously explained process, we use custom device type. Each device requires a unique device identifier and API key. When creating a new device, the user will assign distinctive identifier for both these fields. It is essential to make a note of these identifiers and provide them to the client who will be using the API. Additionally, please ensure that the device is enabled. Access levels for calling the Web API. In order to read or write Web APIs, the user must be granted the following privileges: API read data, API read history data, API write data. Headers to be sent while calling the Web API. To use inSys Web API, use the device identifier as client ID and set the API key as inSys underscore API underscore key in headers while calling the Web API. Also, pass the username and password to read or write the data as keys in the header. There shall be three headers as per the following: inSys underscore API underscore key, inSys underscore API underscore user, and inSys underscore API underscore password. It is important to set headers when making API requests. Headers contain additional information that is sent along with the request, such as authentication credentials, content type. The reason why username and password are typically provided in the headers are 1. Authentication, which ensures that only authorized users or applications can access the API's resources. 2. Security. Using headers, it provides an extra layer of security by keeping the credentials private during transmission. 3. Standardization. Many APIs follow standardized protocols such as HTTP Basic Authentication, which specify that authentication details should be included in the headers. Decide how you want to test the API. You can use tools like Client URL, Postman, or programming languages such as Python. Before providing the API key to the client, I will test it using Postman to ensure its functionality. As you can see, I have configured the headers and included the API key within them, along with the additional information. I am using get HTTP request method to retrieve the current value of the tag fi1502.pv. Upon sending the request, we will establish the communication with the inSis system and successfully retrieve the corresponding value. It is also quite common to encounter scenarios where you need to include multiple parameters using Web APIs. Let's explore how to accomplish this. When designing your API query, include multiple parameters in the request URL. As you can see in the URL, we start with the API endpoint followed by a question mark. After that, we pass our parameters separated by commas. For example, now I am going to request inSys to get the values of FI1502 and FI1503. Upon sending the request, we will successfully retrieve the corresponding tag values. Using Web APIs, you can also call historical data by making a request to the endpoint with the appropriate parameters that specify the date or time range for the desired historical data. After obtaining the necessary credentials and API key from the provider, proceed to construct your API request. I encourage viewers to pause the video and get familiarize themselves with the parameter names and format required to retrieve the historical data. Now I will make a request to inSys API to retrieve historical values for tag names FI1502 and FI1503. The historical data will be provided at an interval of 60 minutes and the aggregation type applied will be value. In this example, the requested data will span from May 28, 2023 at 00 hours to May 28, 2023 at 6 am. By sending the request, we will establish communication with the INSYS system and successfully retrieve the corresponding values. In a similar way, let's try to publish data for two tag names, product1.input1.value and product1.input2.value. The API query required to publish data are as follows. I hope you are familiarized with the parameter names and the format required to publish the data. In this particular scenario, I am using post HTTP method request to publish the data for two tag names. The corresponding values being published are 200 and 400 respectively, and the timestamps associated with these data points are 28 May 2023 at 4 am. By making a request to the specified API endpoint, the data is sent to the server for storage. In my next video, I will show you how to use the tag groups along with tag names in the Web APIs for reading data from inSys. Thank you.